You don't even know what you want, Carla. I know exactly what I want. I just don't know if I'm allowed to want it. Allowed? Who's stopping you? That silence. That's your answer, isn't it? I didn't respond. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. The sound of the fabric against the wood was louder than it should have been. Or maybe everything else had gone that quiet. You called this marriage a mistake, she said. Not angry. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes after too many nights of trying. 3 days ago, in front of my mother, in front of everyone. I remember what I said. I remember how it came out before I could stop it. Clean and precise, like something that had been waiting years for the right door. She didn't slam it when she left. That was somehow worse. And now it's 3 a.m, and I'm sitting on the floor of my office, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooks the whole city. And I cannot stop thinking about her. Not about what I did to our marriage. About her. About the way she looked at me when I said it. Not hurt. Something else. Something that looked almost like relief. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with any of this. I've built an entire life on knowing exactly what to do next. On reading rooms and closing deals and seeing 3 steps ahead of every person in every meeting. I have never once in 41 years sat on a floor and not known what came first. She's in the guest room right now, 12 feet away, sleeping maybe, or staring at the ceiling like I am. Her name is Maria, and I think I am in love with her, and I think I have been for longer than I want to admit. Let me start before the floor, before the dinner party, before my mother-in-law's face, before 3 words escaped my mouth in front of 15 people and rearranged everything. Let me start 6 months ago. When Maria knocked on my office door and told me her firm had been hired to redesign the entire Whitmore Group headquarters, and that she'd be reporting directly to me. She was late, not by a lot. 4 minutes. But I'd been watching the door since 2:56, and 4 minutes in a first impression is a choice, not an accident. And I was already composing the kind of polite dismissal I'd perfected over 20 years in commercial real estate. Then she walked in and said, before I could open my mouth, I know I'm 4 minutes late. I left early to be here on time, and the lobby security took 11 minutes to process my badge, which means your building's check-in protocol is costing you approximately $40,000 a year in lost vendor time. I brought the numbers if you'd like to see them. She put a folder on my desk. I looked at the folder. I looked at her. And then, for the first time in a very long time, I laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not the kind I give at charity dinners when someone says something mildly clever. A real one. Short and surprised, like it had been hiding somewhere and she'd accidentally found it. Sit down, I said. She did. Her name was Maria Reyes. She was 34, 7 years younger than me. She had a firm in Brooklyn that she'd built herself at 28 with 2 business partners, both women, both frighteningly competent. She had a way of listening that made you feel like every word you said was being filed somewhere important. And she wore her hair loose, dark, and past her shoulders, in a way that felt entirely at odds with the precision of everything else about her. I noticed that. I noticed it in the way you notice a detail that doesn't fit a pattern. Academic, professional, entirely neutral. That's what I told myself. We met twice a week for the first month. Tuesdays and Thursdays. My office or the construction site, depending on the phase. She always brought documents. I always had questions. We worked well together in the way that 2 people who understand efficiency can. Nothing wasted, nothing repeated, everything exactly as necessary, except that on the 3rd Thursday, she brought 2 cups of coffee instead of 1, and set mine on the corner of my desk without asking how I took it. Black, no sugar, which is either lucky or not lucky at all. And I didn't say anything, because it seemed like a very small thing to comment on. except that on the second Tuesday of the second month, we were in the elevator going down to the site and she said, apropos of nothing, "Do you actually like any of this? The buildings, I mean, not the business of them." I turned to look at her. That's a strange question. You talk about square footage and ROI and zoning variants like you're reading from a manual. I'm just wondering if you ever look up. I didn't answer her. But on the ride back up, I did. I looked up at the steel frame of what would become the East Atrium, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Something that lived in the chest rather than the head. I didn't tell her that. I told myself it was just the altitude of the scaffolding. My wife, Diane, was kind, steady. She came from the kind of Connecticut family that produces lawyers and architects and women who chair boards of nonprofits and smile with their whole face. We had been together for 8 years, married for 5. We had a beautiful apartment, a shared investment portfolio, 2 cats named after obscure philosophers, and a life that looked, from every external angle, like something you'd want. I had built it with care. I had chosen it deliberately. I had looked at it, year after year, and found it sufficient. I didn't know then that sufficient was a word I used when I didn't want to use the real one. Maria and I had dinner once in November. Not planned. The site meeting ran late. The crew lead needed another hour, and she said there was a good Thai place 3 blocks away, and I said fine without thinking about it. We talked for 2.5 hours. About architecture. About what cities do to people and what people do to cities. About a gallery she'd gone to in Berlin the year before, and a building I'd walked through in Chicago that I'd never told anyone about, because I hadn't known how to explain why it mattered. She knew how to explain it. She put into words something I'd been carrying wordlessly for years. And I sat across from her in a Thai restaurant in Lower Manhattan and felt seen in a way that had nothing to do with business. And I drove home afterward thinking, that was a good evening. Just that. That was all. December came. The project moved into its second phase. I started arriving to our Tuesday meetings 5 minutes early instead of on time. Not consciously. I only noticed it in January, when I looked back at my calendar and saw the pattern. Every Tuesday since November 17th, I was in my office at 9:55. Our meeting started at 10. I told myself I was being thorough, getting my notes in order. I'm a thorough person. It's not unusual. But I also started keeping the second chair angled toward my desk instead of pushed flat against the wall the way I usually had it. Because she always moved it when she came in. And one day I just left it where she put it. Small things, entirely unremarkable. In January, she brought me a book. She left it on the corner of my desk, not handed to me, just left, with a post-it that said, page 73. No explanation. I read it that night. Page 73 was a paragraph about the way light moves through a specific kind of Milanese arcade in the early morning, and the writer described the sensation of walking through it as feeling momentarily outside of time. I read it twice. I thought about texting her to say I'd found it. I thought about it for a while, actually. Then I put my phone down and went to sleep. The next Tuesday, she didn't mention it. I didn't either. But when she left that afternoon, and I was alone in my office again, I noticed that the room felt different. Larger or smaller, I couldn't tell. Just different in some way I didn't have vocabulary for. I was not a woman who lacked vocabulary. That bothered me. Diane and I had friends over for dinner in February. It was the kind of dinner party that we did well. Diane chose the wine, I handled the seating, and together we produced an evening that was stimulating and pleasant and ended at a civilized hour. Our friends were smart, interesting people. I liked them. I sat through the entire dinner feeling like I was watching it from the other side of glass. It wasn't unhappiness exactly. I'd examined unhappiness before and knew its texture. This was something else. More like a frequency I couldn't tune to. Like everyone at the table was speaking a language that had once been native to me, and had somewhere in the last few months become slightly foreign. I drove home afterward. Diane was in the passenger seat, talking about the evening, laughing about something one of our friends had said. And I kept thinking, and I knew even then that this was dangerous. I kept thinking, Maria would have said something about the light in the restaurant, the way it hit the table. She would have noticed. I stopped that thought immediately. I did not pick it up again. But it came back. The way certain thoughts do. Not loudly, not urgently. Just persistently. A low hum you pretend you can't hear until you realize you've been hearing it for months. In March, she told me something she hadn't told her business partners yet. We were in the conference room, alone, waiting for a call that ended up being rescheduled, and she said, out of nowhere, that she was thinking about buying out her partners in 5 years, building something of her own. "Why are you telling me?" I asked. She looked at me for a second longer than necessary. "Because I think you'd understand it," she said. "What it feels like to build something and want it to be yours completely. Not shared, just yours." I did understand it. I understood it in a way that felt like being recognized from across a room. "That specific vertigo," I said. "That makes sense." And then I looked down at my papers and did not look back up for a full minute. She didn't push it. She never pushed anything. That was one of the things I had noticed. She asked questions and then let them breathe. She said things and then left space. She was one of the few people I had ever met who didn't need to fill silence. It occurred to me, sometime in late March, that I thought about her every day. Not all day, just once a day, minimum. A thought that arrived without invitation. Something she'd said. Something she'd noticed. Something I'd seen and thought. I want to tell her about this. I didn't act on those thoughts. I filed them somewhere and told myself they were normal. This is what it felt like to have a professional relationship with someone you respected. This is what intellectual chemistry was. It didn't mean anything else. It was April before I admitted, just to myself, in the 3 minutes between waking up and getting out of bed, that I looked forward to. Tuesdays and Thursdays, in a way I looked forward to almost nothing else. I got up before I could finish the thought. I made coffee. I didn't think about why the thought had scared me. There was an afternoon in May, a Thursday. The project was in its finishing phase, and we were doing a final walkthrough of the East Wing, just the two of us. The site crew had cleared out an hour early because of a union scheduling issue, and the building was quiet in the particular way that big, empty structures are quiet, full of their own echo, their own held breath. The light at 4 in the afternoon came through the atrium glass at an angle I hadn't anticipated. It filled the whole space, warm and amber, and completely unlike the fluorescent glare of the construction period. I stopped walking. She stopped a second later. Because I had. "There it is," she said. I didn't know what she meant. Then I did. She meant the building. The finished thing underneath all the months of planning. The way it finally existed as something that could hold light. We stood there for maybe 30 seconds, side by side, not talking. And then I made the mistake of looking at her instead of the light. She was looking up, her profile against the amber, her hair catching it, and something moved through me. Not slowly, not quietly, but fast and certain, like a door swinging open in a house you thought you knew every room of. I looked away. I started walking. She fell into step beside me and said something about the load-bearing specks on the north wall, and I responded with something that must have made sense because she nodded and wrote something in her notebook. And I spent the rest of the walkthrough being so meticulously professional that I think I talked about ventilation systems for 7 consecutive minutes. In the elevator going down, she said, "You okay?" "Fine, just tired." She nodded. She didn't press it. But in the lobby, when she turned to say goodbye, she looked at me for a moment longer than was necessary. That same second longer that I had started to catalog, that I had started to tell myself meant nothing, and said, "Same time Tuesday?" "Same time Tuesday," I said. She left. I stood in the lobby of my own building for what was probably 4 minutes, maybe 5, not moving. The security guard at the desk eventually asked if I needed anything. I said no, and walked to the elevator. In the car on the way home, I held the steering wheel with both hands and told myself, "This is nothing. You are a professional. You admire her work. You respect her mind. This is the particular intensity that comes with a project at its close. It will pass." It did not pass. May became June. The project officially wrapped. We had a small celebration with the teams involved. Drinks in the Whitmore conference room, catered, nothing extravagant. She wore a dark green dress. I noticed and told myself to stop noticing. She found me near the window, away from the main group, and said, "I wanted to say thank you. Properly. This was the best project I've worked on. You did exceptional work." "That's not what I mean." She paused, looked at me. "I mean, I'm glad it was you, that it was your building, that I got to do this with you." I didn't know what to say. That hadn't happened to me in years, not knowing what to say. I said, "I'm glad it was you too." And I meant it in a way that frightened me. We shook hands when she left that night. Professional. Appropriate. Her hand was warm, and she held the grip for exactly 1 second longer than necessary, and I drove home and stood in the shower for 20 minutes and didn't think. Deliberately, effortfully, did not think. Summer arrived. We had no professional reason to meet anymore. She texted me in July. Just, "I walked past a building today that reminded me of the thing you said about Chicago. You were right about the arches." I stared at that message for an embarrassing amount of time. I typed, "I'm glad. Take a photo next time." I deleted it. I typed, "What building?" I deleted that too. I typed, "Send me the address." I sent that one. She did. I looked it up. I saved the photo to my phone and did not examine why. We started texting. Not frequently. Not in any way that would look like anything from the outside. But once or twice a week, something would come through. An article. A building. A question she was thinking about. And I'd respond, and she'd respond, and sometimes it would go for an hour before one of us had to go do something else. Diane noticed I was on my phone more. She asked who it was. I said work. She said, "The project wrapped in June." I said, "There are always follow-ups." She didn't say anything else. And that was somehow the worst part. That she trusted me. That she believed it without needing me to convince her. That I looked at my wife's open, trusting face and felt something move through me that was neither love nor guilt, but some terrible combination of both. August was a heat wave. Maria texted me on a Saturday. "I'm at the museum. The Renzo piano wing. You should come." I stared at it. Diane was in the living room. I could hear the television. The cats were asleep in the window. I typed, "I can't today." I put the phone down. I picked it up. I typed, "I want to. I just can't." I deleted the second line. I sent, "I can't today. Next time." She sent back, "Okay, next time." I didn't go to the museum. I sat on the edge of the bed in our bedroom and stared at the floor for a while, and then I got up and made lunch and sat with Diane and watched her laugh at something on the screen and thought, I have built a good life. I am inside a good life right now. What is wrong with me? September arrived. I agreed to have dinner with Maria. Just dinner. Between professionals who had worked well together and enjoyed each other's company. Entirely normal. People did this all the time. We were at the restaurant for 3.5 hours. We talked about everything. We talked about nothing. She told me about growing up in Miami, about her mother who worked double shifts and still managed to take her to every museum in the city and make it feel like an adventure. I told her about the first building I ever loved, a library in a small town in Vermont, completely unimportant architecturally, but the afternoon light through its windows had made 10-year-old me feel like the world was bigger than anyone had told her. She listened. She listened the way people do when they're not waiting to talk, when they're just receiving, when every word you say is actually arriving somewhere. I drove home afterward and I sat in the parking garage of our building for 12 minutes before going upstairs. I was not crying, but I was something adjacent to it. And when I went inside and Diane said, "How was dinner?" and I said, "Fine, good, a little long," and she kissed me on the cheek and went back to reading, I understood, fully, with a clarity I had been avoiding for 8 months, that I was in love with Maria Reyes, and that I had no idea what to do with that. But before we go any further, if you've made it to this point, you already know this feeling. That specific moment when you realize something about yourself that you can't put back, when the truth arrives and there's nowhere left to file it except the center of your chest. If this story is hitting somewhere real, hit the like button. It genuinely helps me keep bringing stories like this to you. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and turn on the bell so you never miss one. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually answer in the comments. Have you ever loved someone you knew would cost you everything? Did you stay silent, or did you finally say it out loud? Tell me. I read every single comment, and let me know where you're watching from. I'll heart your city. Now, back to Carla. October. Diane's parents' anniversary dinner. The whole family, extended, in a house in Greenwich that smelled like fresh flowers and old money and a particular kind of careful happiness. I sat at that table, and I watched Diane's mother toast her husband of 40 years. I watched the way she looked at him, practiced and genuine at the same time, the look of someone who had chosen the same person so many times it had become its own kind of love. And I thought, I will never look at Diane that way. Not because I didn't love her. Because I didn't love her the way that required choosing. Because what we had was built on compatibility and timing, and the quiet agreement of two people who made sense on paper. Because I had never once sat across from my wife and felt that door swing open in my chest. I had felt it in an atrium in May, standing next to someone who had no business being in my marriage at all. I got through the dinner. I got through the drive home. I got through the apartment and the quiet, and Diane going to bed, and me telling her I needed an hour. Just unwinding from the evening. You know how I am after family things. She said, "Of course." She trusted me. I sat on the floor of my office and called Maria. She picked up on the second ring. "Hi," I said. "Hi." A pause. She heard something in that one syllable, I think. "You okay?" "I don't know. I think I need to say something and I don't know if I should." "Okay." Just that. Okay. Like she would wait. I think my marriage is not what I thought it was. I stopped. Started again. I think I've been living inside an answer to a question I never actually asked myself. Long pause. Carla. "Yeah. How long have you been sitting with this?" "Long enough." Another pause. Longer. And then she said very quietly, "I know." 2 words, the weight of an entire year inside them. I asked, "You knew?" "I thought I might be wrong. I wanted to be wrong." A breath. "It would have been easier." "For who?" "For both of us." I leaned my head back against the wall. The city outside the window, 41 stories up. Everything quiet and lit and distant. "I don't know what I'm doing," I said. "I know." Then, "You don't have to know right now." We stayed on the phone without talking for a while. Just present. Her breathing. Mine. The sound of the city below that neither of us was in anymore. When we finally hung up, I sat there for another hour. I thought about what was on the other side of the truth I was holding. I thought about Diane, who had not done a single thing wrong. I thought about the life I'd built with meticulous care. The apartment, the portfolio, the philosopher's cat sleeping somewhere down the hall. I thought about what it would cost to tell the truth, and what it would cost to keep not telling it. And somewhere around 2:30 in the morning, I understood something. The cost of staying was going to be paid by everyone. Diane deserved someone who chose her completely, not someone who had learned to call compatibility enough, not someone who sat in parking garages for 12 minutes not wanting to go upstairs. She deserved to be somebody's whole answer, not the life that looked right from the outside. And I had spent 41 years building things that looked right from the outside. I was done. The next morning, a Sunday, I asked Diane to sit with me. I told her everything that mattered. Not Maria, not yet. Just the truth underneath, that I had not been honest with myself for a very long time, that the life we'd built together was real and good, but that somewhere inside it I had been quietly disappearing, that she deserved more than what I was capable of giving her, that I was sorry, that I meant that with everything I had. She didn't cry right away. She looked at me for a long time, her face doing something I hadn't seen before, not hurt, not betrayal, but a particular kind of recognition. Like something she'd been waiting to understand had finally become legible. "I know," she said, eventually, quietly. "I think I've known for a while." That was almost harder than anything else. 3 days later, the dinner party at her mother's, and something happened that I hadn't planned. Her mother asked me a question about our future, about timing, about whether we'd thought about next steps. And Diane was right there, and I looked at my wife's face and I heard myself say, "I think this marriage has been a mistake. Not to wound, not from cruelty, from a truth that had finally grown too large to stay inside." The room went silent, and across the table, Maria, who had been invited because she was a family friend of Diane's cousin, because the world had apparently decided irony was its preferred mode of operation. Maria looked at me, not with shock, with something that looked like grief and relief at the exact same time. She called me the next morning. I was in my office, not working, just sitting with the windows, the city, the aftermath of everything I'd set in motion. "I saw your face last night," Maria said, "when you said it. I know. I'm not calling because of that. I'm calling because I want to know if you're okay." "I don't think so." A pause. "But I think I will be." "That's different from where you were a year ago." It was. A year ago I didn't know what was wrong. Now I knew exactly what it was. That's a different kind of pain, more specific, sharper, but also more honest. And I have always preferred honesty to comfort, even when honesty is harder. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Okay." "What I feel for you, I need to know if it goes one way." The silence lasted long enough that I felt my chest tighten. And then she said, "Carla, I changed which route I took to work for 3 months so I wouldn't walk past your building every day and have to talk myself out of everything I was feeling." I exhaled, slow and controlled. The way you breathe when something you've been bracing for turns out to be different than the impact you'd anticipated. "That's a very you answer," I said. "I know." A pause. Something in her voice shifted, softer, more unguarded than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't want to be the reason for anything. I didn't want to be the story someone tells about why their marriage ended. That's not..." She stopped. "That's not how I wanted this." "This didn't end because of you," I said. It ended because I finally stopped lying to myself. You made it impossible to keep pretending the lie was enough. Is that good? I think so. I think eventually it will be very good. Diane and I had already agreed to separate before that phone call, quietly, without the theater that I suspect neither of us had the energy for. She was staying with her sister for a few weeks. We were being fair to each other, which was the very least we owed the 8 years we'd spent. The apartment was mine. I'd bought it before we married. The evening after I spoke to Maria, I stood at the window for a long time. I thought about what I was walking into. The conversations, the paperwork, the explanations, the people who would take sides, and the people who would disappear. I thought about my mother, who would worry. About Diane's family, who would be hurt. About the particular loneliness of dismantling a life, even one you chose to dismantle. None of it disappeared just because I'd made the right choice. That's the part they leave out, I think. The part where the brave thing and the hard thing are the exact same thing and you have to do them anyway. I texted Maria. I know this isn't simple. I know what comes next is a long time of things being complicated. But I wanted you to know, I'm not afraid of that. I'm just afraid of not being honest anymore. She wrote back after a moment. I'm not going anywhere. 4 words. I read them 4 times. We didn't see each other for 6 weeks after that. It was my choice. I needed to sit inside what I'd chosen before I reached for what came next. I needed to be sure that what I was doing was for the right reason, not to replace one thing with another, not to trade one version of living a prescribed life for a different, more complicated version of the same. I talked to a therapist. I ran 3 miles every morning through Riverside Park in November air that felt like it was cleaning something out of me. I called my oldest friend, the one who had always known something was slightly off and never said so because I wasn't ready to hear it. I sat with myself. Quietly. In a way I don't think I'd ever done before. And what I found there, underneath all the structure and the strategy and the careful construction of a life that looked right, was a woman who was actually quite simple in her wants. She wanted to look up. She wanted to stop translating everything she felt into something useful. She wanted to be seen. Maria and I had coffee in December, a Sunday morning, 8:15, a small place near her apartment in Brooklyn that she'd been going to for years. The coffee was strong. The chairs were mismatched. There was a plant in the window that had no business being as large as it was. She was already there when I arrived. She stood when she saw me, and for a moment we were just there, in the same space, without agenda, without project specs or professional courtesy, or the careful architecture of not saying things. "Hi," she said. "Hi." She smiled. The real one. The one I had cataloged without meaning to. I sat across from her, and the coffee arrived, and we started to talk, and I understood, in the first 5 minutes, that this was it. This was the thing I had been walking toward without knowing it, not the conversation itself, the ease of it, the specific relief of being with someone you don't have to perform for. I had not known, until I stopped performing, how tired I had been. She reached across the table at some point, not for my hand, just toward the sugar that was on my side, and her fingers brushed mine for a half second, accidental. And she looked up, and I didn't look away. Neither did she. Outside, December light fell on the street in the particular way that winter light does, low and amber and longer than summer, touching everything at a slant. The plant in the window threw a shadow on the table between us. I thought about page 73. I thought about the library in Vermont, and the atrium in May, and the museum I hadn't gone to in August. I thought about all the things I'd been building toward without a blueprint. "You're smiling," Maria said. "I know." "What are you thinking about?" "Light," I said. She looked at me for a second. Then she smiled too. Yeah, she said. Me too. What I lost to get here was real. I want to be clear about that. I am not standing inside this new life pretending that nothing broke on the way. Something broke. Something that had taken years to build, that had housed real warmth and real intention, even if it had never quite been the right size for me. But what I found, in the place where I stopped pretending. Myself. Unedited. Looking up. And sometimes, most of the time, that is exactly enough. If this story reached you somewhere real, type courage in the comments. So I know you stayed all the way to the end. And if you want to keep coming back for stories like this one, stories about the cost and the gift of finally being honest, click the video on your screen right now. A big hug, and I'll see you in the next one.